Very worrying commentary coming out of the Reserve Bank as we take a look at business news this Wednesday morning. It's 10 after 8 in case you've just joined us. Good morning. The Reserve Bank saying there is a concern that South Africa could get hit by direct sanctions or indirect sanctions. It's all got to do with our neutrality, our non-stance, if you will, on the war between Russia and Ukraine. We've already seen the effects that it's having on the currency. We'll show you that again a little bit later and see what is happening with the rand against the dollar. It's still sitting very, very high at the moment, well over 19 rand 60. Now, there's fears, of course, of stagflation. There's a big fancy economic word. What exactly does that mean? Well, let's talk about all those things. I'm joined by George Glynos, Head of Research at ETM Analytics. George, good morning. Appreciate your time
good morning, Gareth.
And we're taking a look at the currencies at the moment. So the Brent crude price is at least recovering ever so slightly. So commodities aren't being hit too badly, but we're going to see the currencies as you and I talk, and very worrying for the rand dollar. But that could be the least of our problems if we're hit by sanctions. What could that look like, and how serious do you take that?
We take it very seriously, and I don't really understand the position of this government at this point. It's kind of like, as you put it, a non-position. They're not committing one way or another. But the one inescapable fact is that we are unfortunately at the mercy of what this government chooses to do. And as we've seen so far, none of the actions that have been forthcoming from this government since the beginning of the year have assisted the rand in any way whatsoever. In fact, if anything, we can put the bulk of the rand weakness down to government inaction, maladministration, and the general inability to be able to manage this economy properly. So we find ourselves in a very awkward position, made that much worse by the fact that we are now playing chicken with the Western world insofar as Russia is concerned, and taking a position which is in essence the polar opposite to what our major trading partners would like to see. And it is disturbing, because if we do land up piling on more pressure on top of the pressure we're already feeling from the likes of Eskom, SOE failures, an underperforming economy, grey listing, portfolio outflows, and to that we add further sanctions, one can only imagine the implications for the rand, and we could be talking about levels substantially higher than 20 rand to the dollar.
I think many people would agree with you, George, as well. It's almost starting to feel like we're the only child in a newly divorced couple, and we're having to be shared one weekend and one weekend off, but we can't figure out which parent we actually prefer. The problem with this, though, as you say, we could be heading for a bit of a financial doomsday, because I will mention grey listing, something of a technical recession, and the stagflation as well. Just give me an economics 101 lesson, if you don't mind. What am I talking about when I say stagflation? It doesn't sound like fun.
No, it's not fun. I mean, it's a worst case scenario where you've got a period of really low or negative growth combined with a period of very high inflation. So for your average household, not only are they dealing with the cost of living crisis, which we're all experiencing at the moment, but on top of that, they are now faced with an economy that is struggling to generate meaningful opportunities for enough people. And given South Africa's problems with unemployment, it's quite clear that we need to be doing everything in our power to try and grow that employment base such that we boost consumption and assist this economy in growing. But instead, we are dealing with the exact opposite. We've got high levels of inflation combined with what looks like could very well be negative growth for the year as a whole. So again, major headwinds being faced, most of that self-inflicted, if you can believe that. And that's the frustrating thing for most South Africans, is that we are at the mercy of this government and how it chooses to manage its affairs. And up until now, it's done a pretty poor job of it.
Yeah, some would say about not managing their affairs might be a way of describing it as well. And here is where the Titanic could very much hit the iceberg. Later this year, we are expected to be hosting the BRICS leaders, George, of course, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's expected to be here as well. Could that be, as I use another terrible cliche, the straw that breaks the camel's back? I mean, just how dangerous could this be for our economic stability? Sanctions, stagflation, technical recession, the grey listing watching. As I mentioned, you've got all those oversight bodies like Moody's also watching what we're doing. How dangerous would it be for us to host the Russian president economically?
Well, incredibly dangerous. I mean, the situation's already charged by virtue of what happened in Simonstown and what did or didn't get loaded onto the Lady R. We've already got very difficult geopolitical relations with America. I can assure you that the rest of the Western allies are not going to be far behind. South Africa risks characterizing itself as a pariah state. It's just absolutely not what we need right now, and it beggars belief that we are playing with fire in the way that we are. But quite clearly, there are some vested interests within the ANC that have aligned themselves to Russia. There have been some reports produced by certain news vendors that have drawn a link between Russia and the ANC and its funding ahead of next year's elections. So one can assume that there's an element of that behind all of this playing out. But in the interim, this government is taking the rest of us along for the ride, and it's an unpleasant ride and one that could end in tears later this year. The situation is a very sensitive one, and the further we go down this road, the more dangerous it becomes. And I can assure you, nobody wants to see a rand that is blowing out to 21, 22, or God forbid, even higher to the dollar. It imposes a tremendous cost on this economy. It is going to plunge the economy into a really deep recession, totally unnecessary, and over and above that, force the Reserve Bank's hand to try and do something to stabilize the currency, lest it produces an even bigger inflation burden for poor people. And therein lies a really ugly story if we're not careful. And so, we would urge again, repeatedly, this government to reconsider its position and to do things that are likely to appease some of these financial markets and just allow the private sector a little bit of time to breathe, collect itself, and do what it does best. And that is try and make money, try and employ people, grow this economy, and just stabilize the situation.
George Glynos, I appreciate your time. I'm sure we'll speak again. Let's bring up the markets very quickly. As I say goodbye to George, he was talking, wasn't he, about where the rand dollar is at the moment. Let's bring up the markets for you and remind you, commodities aren't looking too bad at the moment. It's a slight recovery for the Brent crude price. It has come down just under 0.10% at the moment. We watch that, of course, because we all want to know how much more we're going to pay for fuel. Gold recovering ever so slightly, 0.25%. It's still hovering around 1964 for gold at the moment, $1,964. But let's flip this one. Here's what George is talking about. It's the currencies. Take a look at that. Yesterday at the trade close, 1968. Today we're already down to 1974, and that isn't even the worst that it's been in the last 24 hours. So when George Glynos says, if we're not careful as a country, we could be back smashing through 20, 21, 22. Who knows where that could stop? And we all know what that means when it comes to interest rates, what it means to import and export, and of course, what it means to jobs.